He didn't come to stop the wedding. He came to watch the only woman he ever loved marry another man, smile through it, and disappear from her life forever. But 3 minutes before she was supposed to walk down the aisle, he heard her screaming behind a locked door, and when he broke it down, he found her curled on the floor in a torn wedding gown, blood on her wrists, and a sonogram clutched so tightly in her fist that it had torn down the middle. What happened in the next 20 minutes would end a congressman's career, expose a 9-figure fraud, and reveal a secret that had been growing inside her for 4.5 months. If you think you know how this story ends, you don't. Stay to the end, because the final twist changes everything you think you understand about who the real villain is. Nathaniel Cross had buried men. He had watched empires fall, had once sat calmly across a table from a man who was trying to kill him and ordered a second drink. Nothing rattled him, but the cream-colored envelope that arrived at his Back Bay office on a Tuesday morning in early September had done something no bullet, no federal subpoena, no rival family had ever managed. It had made his hands shake. Claire Whitmore and Congressman Dean Foster request the honor of your presence. He read it 4 times before he set it down. Then he read it a 5th. The wedding was in 18 days at the Ashworth estate outside Charleston, a plantation-turned-events venue with white columns and old money hanging in the Spanish moss. Nathaniel didn't know who had put his name on that guest list, and he didn't care. What he cared about was the fact that somewhere in the last year, without his permission, without his knowledge, Claire had agreed to spend the rest of her life with a man who was not him. He told himself he wasn't going to go. He told himself that for 11 of the 18 days. In the meantime, he did what he always did with things that threatened to break him open. He worked. He closed a 9-figure port acquisition in Savannah. He fired a logistics manager who'd been skimming shipments for 2 years and quietly made sure the man's family never missed a mortgage payment despite it. He sat in board meetings and said all the right things and felt, the entire time, like a man watching his own life happen from somewhere just outside his body. Claire Whitmore had never fit cleanly into the world he came from, and that had always been the point. She'd been a 3rd-year surgical resident the night they met, pulled into a downtown trauma bay at 2 in the morning to close a gunshot wound on one of Nathaniel's lieutenants, a man who wasn't supposed to survive the drive to the hospital. She hadn't known who Nathaniel was when she stitched him up in the hallway outside the OR because the trauma bays were full, hands steady despite the blood soaking through her scrubs, cursing at him in a low, furious voice for bleeding on her clean floor. He'd fallen for her before she ever knew his last name, and by the time she found out exactly what the Cross family did for a living, it was already too late for either of them to walk away cleanly. For 2 years they had built something that felt, against every reasonable expectation, like an ordinary life. Sunday mornings at a diner on King Street where nobody recognized either of them. Arguments about which one of them was worse at karaoke. A dog named Biscuit that Claire had insisted on adopting from a shelter despite Nathaniel's very reasonable objection that a Rottweiler Shepherd mix with anxiety issues did not belong in a house that occasionally received threats by mail. It had been, for a while, the only version of his life that had ever felt like it belonged to him instead of to the empire his father built. Then came the SUV on the Cooper River Bridge, and all of it came apart in the space of about 4 seconds. On a Thursday night, sitting alone in the penthouse that still smelled faintly of her perfume even though she'd been gone for nearly a year, he opened his laptop and looked up everything there was to know about Congressman Dean Foster. What he found made his blood go cold in a completely different way. Dean Foster was 38 years old, a 3rd-term congressman from South Carolina's 1st District, and according to every glossy profile written about him, the future of the Republican Party. Harvard Law, Fortune 500 legal counsel before he ran for office. A jawline built for campaign posters and a voting record so carefully centrist it could have been designed by a committee because it had been. He was, on paper, everything Nathaniel Cross was not. Clean hands, public record. A man who had never once had to make a call that ended with somebody disappearing. Nathaniel closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. He and Claire had been over for 11 months. Not because either of them had stopped loving the other, he would go to his grave believing that was never the problem, but because loving Nathaniel Cross came with a body count, and eventually the danger stopped being an abstraction and started being a black SUV that ran her off the road on the Cooper River Bridge doing 65 miles an hour. Nobody had been hurt. That was the only mercy in it. But Claire had walked into his office 2 days later, still pale, and told him that she couldn't keep waking up wondering if today was the day someone finished the job that was supposed to be his, not hers. He hadn't fought her. He had let her go because some part of him agreed with every word. He told himself in the weeks that followed that the kindest thing he could do was disappear completely. No calls, no accidental run-ins arranged by mutual friends. He gave her a clean, quiet exit from the wreckage of his world, and in the 11 months since, he had built a wall around that decision so high that even his own people had stopped mentioning her name in front of him. The invitation cracked that wall down to the foundation. He didn't RSVP. He simply decided 4 days before the wedding that he was going to be there, not to object, not to make a scene. He told himself, and later he told Marcus Reyes, the man who had been at his side since they were 19 years old running numbers on the docks, that he only needed to see her face one more time. He needed to see that she was happy, that Dean Foster made her laugh the way Nathaniel used to, that she'd found the safe, ordinary life she deserved. Then he would go home and finally let her go for real. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said for the third time, as their car turned off the county road and the gates of the Ashworth estate rose up out of the September haze, wrought iron and old brick, and 100 years of Southern money. "Say the word and I turn this thing around." "I made her a promise a long time ago," Nathaniel said, watching the estate come into view through tinted glass. "I told her I'd always know she was safe. I'm not breaking that promise today. I see her smile, I see this foster kid treats her right, and we're gone before the vows start. 20 minutes. Marcus didn't look convinced, but he didn't argue either. He'd learned a long time ago that there were only two men Nathaniel Cross never argued with, himself and Claire Whitmore. The estate grounds were already thick with cars by the time they arrived, a small fortune in German engineering lining the gravel drive, valets in white gloves jogging between them. String lights had been threaded through 200-year-old live oaks. Somewhere beyond the main house, a jazz quartet was tuning up. It looked, Nathaniel thought as he stepped out of the car and buttoned his jacket, like the kind of wedding that got written up in magazines. The kind of wedding that had nothing to do with the woman he remembered, who used to eat gas station tamales at 2 in the morning and laugh so hard at her own jokes that she'd snort. Wedding coordinator with a clipboard and a headset tried to intercept him near the entrance to the reception tent, asking politely which side of the family he was seated with. Nathaniel didn't answer. He simply looked at her until she stepped aside, some instinct telling her that whatever this man was here for, it had nothing to do with a seating chart. Waitstaff moved past him carrying trays of champagne toward a crowd that had no idea yet that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. A photographer crouched near the garden arch, framing shots of white roses and gold Chiavari chairs for a wedding album that would never exist. He walked through the crowd like smoke through a room nobody wanted to breathe in. He walked through the crowd like smoke through a room nobody wanted to breathe in. People recognized him, of course they did. Half the room had done business, legal or otherwise, with Cross Industries at some point, and conversations died in his wake and picked back up a beat too late, a beat too loud. He didn't stop for any of it. His eyes moved across the sea of pastel dresses and seersucker suits, searching. He found the wrongness before he found her. It was small at first. A wedding planner speaking too fast into a walkie-talkie near the tent flaps, her face bloodless under her makeup. Two bridesmaids in sage green standing by the garden entrance, one of them visibly crying while the other whispered something urgent and kept glancing over her shoulder. The string quartet had stopped playing without starting again, and nobody seemed to have noticed except Nathaniel, who noticed everything, because noticing everything was the only reason he was still alive at 41 years old. He checked his watch. 14 minutes until the ceremony was supposed to begin. The groom was nowhere in the receiving line where he should have been shaking hands. Neither was the bride. Something in his chest, some ancient alarm system that had kept him breathing through 3 assassination attempts and 1 federal indictment, began to scream. He moved toward the main house without deciding to, cutting through a service hallway lined with catering carts, past a security guard in an ill-fitting rental tuxedo who opened his mouth to object and then thought better of it when he got a look at Nathaniel's face. The upstairs hallway of the old plantation house was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, the kind of quiet that gets built around something people don't want witnesses to. He heard her before he saw her, not screaming, not yet, but a low, ragged, broken sound, the sound of someone trying very hard to cry silently and failing. The door to the bridal suite was cracked open 6 inches. Nathaniel pushed it the rest of the way, and the sight on the other side of it rearranged something permanent in his chest. The room had been beautiful an hour ago. Now it looked like a crime scene dressed in white silk. An antique mirror lay shattered across the floor, the frame splintered against the baseboard like it had been thrown. A crystal vase of white peonies had gone over with it, water and broken glass pooling across the hardwood. And in the middle of all of it, wedged into the corner between an armoire and the wall with her knees pulled to her chest, was Claire. Her wedding gown, a column of ivory silk that must have cost more than most people's cars, was torn at the shoulder seam, hanging loose to expose a stretch of bruised skin along her collarbone. Her hair, which had been pinned into an elaborate twist that morning, had half come loose, dark strands sticking to her tear-streaked face. And her wrists, Nathaniel's stomach dropped when he saw her wrists, red and raw where something had bound them, rope burned pink against pale skin. But it was her hands that stopped his heart entirely. Both of them were pressed flat and low against her stomach, not in the way a woman protects herself from a blow, in the way a mother shields a child. Claire, her name came out of him cracked in half. Her head snapped up, eyes wide with a fear so total it took him a full second to understand that some small part of that fear was aimed at him, at the possibility that he was one more threat walking through that door. Then recognition broke across her face, and she made a sound like something had been let out of a cage. "Nathaniel," she said it like a prayer and a warning at the same time. "You can't be here, you have to go right now before he." Before who? His voice had dropped into the register Marcus, called the graveyard voice, the one that came out maybe twice a year and always meant somebody's world was about to end. He crossed the wrecked room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in front of her, ignoring the glass biting through the fabric of his trousers. "Claire, who did this to you?" She was shaking too hard to answer at first. He reached for her wrists as gently as he had ever touched anything in his life, turning them over in the wedding suite light, and the sight of the rope burns up close made a sound come out of his own throat that he didn't recognize. "He said it was for my own good," she finally whispered. "He said I was hysterical. He said if I kept trying to leave, he'd tell everyone I had a breakdown, that I was unstable, that no one would believe anything I said after that." "Dane did this." She flinched at the name like it was a slap. "It's not Nathaniel, it's not that simple. You don't understand what's happening. If you go after him, if you do anything, my mother is going to prison. Do you understand me? She is going to prison for something she didn't do, and it will be my fault." Nathaniel went very still, the particular stillness that Marcus and his entire organization had learned to fear more than his shouting ever could. Start from the beginning, all of it, right now. Claire pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, dragging in a breath that shuddered on the way down. 6 months ago, an audit at the Whitmore Children's Foundation turned up $11 million missing from the endowment. My mother's name is on the board. My mother's signature is on half the disbursement authorizations. The other name on those documents is a foundation officer who left the country 4 months ago and hasn't been seen since. Her voice cracked. Dean's office ran point on the federal referral. He came to see my mother personally. He told her, he told both of us, that he could make the whole thing disappear. All he needed in exchange was a wife, someone respectable, someone who photographed well next to him for the governor's race next year. Nathaniel felt something in his chest go glacially cold, the kind of cold that made his voice come out perfectly level even as every muscle in his body wanted to put a fist through the wall. He blackmailed you into marrying him. He told me if I smiled at every fundraiser, if I stood next to him at every rally, if I said yes today in front of 300 witnesses, the investigation into my mother would quietly close for lack of evidence. A fresh wave of tears broke over her face. And if I ever tried to back out, or if I ever told anyone the truth, he'd make sure the DOJ moved forward within the week. My mother is 63 years old, Nathaniel. She has a heart condition. She would not survive prison. And this, he nodded at her bound wrists, at the wrecked room, forcing the words out through a jaw clenched so tight it ached. This is what happened when you tried to tell him you couldn't go through with it. She nodded, and for a moment she couldn't speak at all. I came in here 20 minutes ago to get dressed, she finally managed. And I found something. I hadn't told anyone yet. I was still trying to figure out what to do, how to protect everyone, and he came in to check on me before the ceremony, and he saw it sitting on the vanity, and she stopped. Her whole body curled tighter around her own stomach. He asked me whose it was. Nathaniel followed her gaze to the vanity, where a small white plastic wand lay half hidden beneath a fallen orchid stem. 2 solid pink lines. The room seemed to tilt very slightly around him. Claire, her name came out of him as barely more than air. Are you? 18 weeks. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd walked through that door, something other than terror moved across her face, something raw and unguarded and terrified in an entirely different way. It happened in April, the night you flew up to Boston for your father's memorial, and I came because I couldn't stand the thought of you standing there alone. We told ourselves it didn't mean anything. That it was just grief, just one night, and we'd both go back to our separate lives in the morning. Nathaniel's mind went back 4.5 months in an instant, a hotel room overlooking the Charles River, rain against the windows, the two of them clinging to each other in the wreckage of a funeral, because for one night, neither of them had been able to remember why they'd ever agreed to stay apart. He remembered waking up before dawn and watching her sleep and thinking, with a kind of despair he'd never admitted to another living soul, that letting her go had been the single greatest mistake of his entire life. It's mine, he said. It wasn't a question. It's yours. Her voice broke completely on the second word. I found out 3 days ago. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call off the wedding without my mother going to prison, and I couldn't marry Dean and let him raise our... She couldn't finish the sentence. So I decided I was just going to disappear after the ceremony, tell him I'd lost it, protect the baby by lying to everyone, including you, for the rest of my life. Nathaniel reached out and framed her face in both hands, thumbs brushing the tears from her cheekbones with a gentleness that stood in violent contrast to the storm building behind his eyes. You are done lying to protect other people, he said. That ends in the next 60 seconds. Do you understand me? Nobody is going to prison, and nobody is marrying anybody except me, and I promise you, on my father's grave, on everything I have ever built, that congressman is never going to lay a hand on you or on our child again. Nathaniel, you don't understand what he's capable of. No, his voice dropped lower, quieter, and somehow that made it more terrifying than shouting ever could have. He doesn't understand what I'm capable of. That's about to become a very expensive lesson. He stood, pulling her gently to her feet, and shrugged out of his suit jacket to settle it over her bare, bruised shoulders, covering the torn seam of her gown. He kept one arm locked around her waist, anchoring her against his side, as if letting go for even a second might cause the whole fragile moment to shatter like the mirror on the floor. We're leaving through the East Hall, he said, already moving. Keep your eyes on me, don't look at anyone else. He pulled his phone from his pocket without breaking stride. Marcus answered on the first ring. I need the car at the service entrance in 90 seconds, Nathaniel said, voice flat and cold and utterly in control. And I need you to pull everything we have on the Whitmore Foundation audit. Everything. Whatever Foster thinks is buried, I want it dug up in the next 10 minutes. On it, Marcus said, and Nathaniel could hear him already moving, already barking orders to the two men who traveled down from Boston with them. They made it almost to the back stairwell before the door at the far end of the hallway slammed open hard enough to crack against the plaster. Claire, Dean Foster's voice rang off the old walls, sharp with a panic he was trying and failing to disguise as authority. He stood silhouetted against the light from the ballroom, his tuxedo jacket unbuttoned, his campaign poster hair disheveled, flanked by two men in dark suits who had the unmistakable bearing of private security rather than wedding guests. "Where do you think you're taking my fiancée?" Nathaniel didn't stop walking. He didn't so much as break stride. He simply tightened his arm around Claire and let his silence do the talking until he was close enough that Dean Foster's security detail instinctively shifted their weight, hands twitching toward the interior of their jackets. "She's not your fiancée," Nathaniel said, and the quiet certainty in his voice was somehow louder than a shout. "And in about 4 minutes, Congressman, you're not going to be anybody's future governor either." Dean's eyes flicked to Nathaniel's face, and something in them faltered, the recognition of a man who had spent his career in rooms full of powerful people and knew, instantly and instinctively, that he had just walked into a room with someone more dangerous than himself. He recovered fast, the practiced arrogance of a career politician sliding back into place. "You have no idea who you're dealing with, Cross. I have federal contacts. I can have you detained before you make it off this property." "Detained for what?" Nathaniel finally stopped walking, close enough now that he could see the sheen of sweat breaking across Dean's forehead despite the evening chill. "For removing a woman from a wedding she was blackmailed into. Or should we talk about the $11 million missing from the Whitmore Foundation, and the fact that Rosalind Whitmore's signature on those disbursement forms doesn't match her actual signature on file with the state bar, because somebody forged it?" The color drained out of Dean Foster's face in real time. "That's not," he started. "My people have had eyes on that audit for 6 days, Nathaniel continued, his voice never rising, never losing its terrible calm. "You want to know something interesting about the officer who supposedly fled the country with $11 million? He didn't flee anywhere. He's been dead since March. Boating accident off Hilton Head, very sad, very final, which means somebody else has been moving that money for the last 6 months using his name as cover. And that somebody needed a scapegoat close enough to the foundation to take the fall if anyone came looking. Rosalind Whitmore fit perfectly, especially once her daughter's fiancé happened to be the congressman running federal oversight on the very investigation that would clear her." "You're bluffing," Dean said, but his voice had lost every trace of its courtroom polish. "AMI." Nathaniel pulled a slim black flash drive from his inside pocket, holding it up just long enough for Dean to see it before closing his fist around it again. "Wire transfer logs. Shell company registration in the Caymans under Ashworth Capital Partners, which, interestingly enough, shares a registered agent with your campaign's leadership pack. And a voicemail, recovered about 11 minutes ago, of you personally instructing your chief of staff to, and I'm quoting directly, keep the Whitmore woman scared enough to keep her mouth shut through the wedding." Behind Dean, one of his security men shifted uncomfortably, glancing sideways at his partner. Whatever they had been hired to do tonight, it clearly hadn't included federal wire fraud. "You framed an innocent woman to save your own career," Nathaniel said, and for the first time real fury cracked through the ice in his voice. "And then you put your hands on her daughter. You tied her wrists together in a room full of broken glass 3 weeks before she was supposed to give birth to my child, and you told her nobody would ever believe her if she told the truth." He took one slow step forward, and both of Dean's security men instinctively retreated half a pace, some primal instinct overriding whatever they were being paid. "I want you to understand something very clearly, Congressman. I have spent 20 years building an organization that most federal task forces are afraid to investigate directly. I did not have to lift a single finger tonight to destroy you. All I had to do was let the truth catch up to you, which it was always going to, eventually, because men like you always believe they're smarter than the paper trail they leave behind." "What do you want?" Dean said, and his voice had gone thin and reedy, all the performance stripped out of it. "I want you to understand that in the next 4 minutes, copies of everything on this drive are going to land in the inbox of the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Charleston Post, and Courier's Investigations Desk, and the ranking member of the House Ethics Committee." Nathaniel's smile was the coldest thing Claire had ever seen on his face, and she had seen him smile at men he was about to destroy before. And I want you to spend every single day of the prison sentence that follows remembering that you had the chance to just be a decent man, and you chose to be a monster instead. Somewhere out there is the person who actually stole that $11 million, and my people are going to find them too, because unlike the FBI, I don't have a jurisdiction problem. Dean's mouth opened and closed twice, with nothing coming out. His security detail had gone very still, the kind of stillness that meant they had already mentally resigned from tonight's paycheck. "This isn't over," Dean finally managed, though the words came out with none of the weight he clearly wanted them to carry. "You're right," Nathaniel said. "It's just beginning, for her, for our child, for the rest of a life you tried to steal from both of them." He turned his back on the congressman with a contempt so total it was almost worse than violence, guiding Claire toward the stairwell. Over his shoulder, without breaking stride, he added, "Oh, and Congressman, the guests downstairs are about to hear an announcement that the wedding's been called off due to a federal investigation into the groom. I'd start thinking about a very good lawyer instead of a wedding toast." They made it down the back stairwell and out through the kitchen entrance into the cool evening air, past startled catering staff who pressed themselves against the walls to let them pass. Marcus was already waiting at the service gate with the car running, back door open, expression carved from granite as he watched Nathaniel guide Claire into the back seat with a tenderness that stood in stark relief against everything that had just happened upstairs. The car pulled away from the Ashworth estate as the first hints of blue and red light began flickering against the tree line down the long gravel drive. County sheriffs, arriving in response to a call Marcus had made the moment Nathaniel walked through that bridal suite door, not for Dean Foster's benefit, but to make absolutely certain there would be an official record of exactly what state Claire had been found in. Inside the car, the chaos of the last 20 minutes gave way to a heavy, trembling silence. Claire sat curled against the leather seat, Nathaniel's jacket still wrapped around her shoulders, her bound wrists cradled against her chest, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. Outside the window, the oak trees and the string lights and the ruins of the wedding that was never supposed to happen slid past and disappeared. "I should have come to you the moment I found out," Claire finally whispered, staring at her own hands. "About the baby, about all of it. I was so afraid of pulling you back into danger that I almost let that man tie a rope around my life for the next 40 years. "You were protecting your mother," Nathaniel said quietly, reaching across the seat to take her bound wrists as gently as if they were made of glass, working the raw rope marks free with careful fingers. "You were protecting our child. There's no version of this where that makes you weak, Claire. It makes you the strongest person I have ever known." "He's going to come after your organization now," she said. "He's going to try to take you down out of spite, even with everything you have on him." "Let him try." Nathaniel lifted her hands and pressed a kiss to each raw, reddened wrist in turn, a gesture so tender it didn't seem to belong to the same man who, 10 minutes earlier, had promised to end a congressman's career with the terrifying calm of a man reading a grocery list. "I have spent my entire life being the villain in other people's stories, Claire. Tonight, for the first time, I got to be something else. I got to be the reason you're safe. I intend to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that." She let out a broken, disbelieving laugh, half sob. "You do understand you just publicly destroyed a sitting congressman on his own wedding day." "He destroyed himself," Nathaniel said. "I just made sure everyone found out about it before he could hurt you again." His hand slid, slow and reverent, to rest against the small curve of her stomach beneath his jacket, and something in his hard, careful expression cracked open completely. 18 weeks. 18 weeks, she confirmed, and covered his hand with her own. "I'm not the kind of man who deserves a second chance at this," he said quietly, and for the first time all night his voice wavered. "I let you walk away from me because I told myself it was the only way to keep you alive. I have spent 11 months telling myself that was the right decision, and I have hated myself every single day for making it." "You were wrong," she said softly, "not about the danger. The danger was real, but you were wrong that the answer was distance. The answer was always both of us, together, figuring it out. I just wish it hadn't taken almost losing everything for either of us to admit that." Nathaniel pressed his forehead gently against hers, the tension finally beginning to bleed out of his shoulders now that she was safe against him, and the estate was shrinking into the darkness behind them. "No more running," he said. "No more distance. No more disappearing to protect each other from things we should be facing side by side. I have a house on Kiowa Island with more security than most federal buildings. Your mother is already safe. My people picked her up from her home 20 minutes before I ever walked into that bridal suite, because I was not about to let Dean Foster hold her hostage one more day than he already had. We are going to go there tonight, all of us, and we are going to figure out the rest of it together. Starting with getting you and this baby somewhere safe and warm and far away from anyone who ever thought they could use fear to control you." Claire closed her eyes, letting herself finally exhale for what felt like the first time in 6 months, the terror of the last hour slowly loosening its grip on her chest. Whatever waited for them in the weeks ahead, the federal case against Dean Foster, the search for whoever had actually stolen $11 million from a children's foundation, the reporters who would inevitably come calling once the story broke, none of it frightened her half as much as the life she had almost been forced to live instead. A life of smiling for cameras next to a man who tied ropes around her wrists and called it love. She had a different kind of dangerous man beside her now, one whose hands, however dark the world that shaped them, had only ever been used to shield her. "Marry me for real this time," Nathaniel said, so quietly it was almost lost beneath the hum of the tires on the wet highway. "Not tonight, not in front of 300 strangers who came to watch a spectacle. Somewhere quiet, once all of this is behind us. Just us, our families, and a daughter or son who is going to grow up knowing exactly how hard both of us fought to give them a safe life." Claire looked up at him, tears finally falling for a reason that had nothing to do with fear, and nodded. Somewhere behind them, in the wreckage of the Ashworth estate, sheriff's deputies were leading a stunned, silent congressman out through the same service entrance his own security detail had once guarded so carefully. Ahead of them, the coastal highway stretched out dark and open under sky finally beginning to clear after the storm, carrying 2 people and the fragile, fierce beginning of a family neither of them had been brave enough to claim until fear forced their hand. It would take months to untangle everything Dean Foster had built his campaign on top of. It would take a federal task force, 3 forensic accountants, and a whistleblower inside his own office to finally trace the $11 million back to its true source, a discovery that would shock even Nathaniel Cross when it finally surfaced. But that was a fight for tomorrow. Tonight there was only the quiet hum of the highway, the warmth of her hand in his, and the small, steady weight of everything they had almost lost, safe now, and finally, impossibly, home. "So here's what I want to know from you. If you were in Claire's position, trapped between protecting someone you love and telling the truth, do you think she made the right call staying silent as long as she did, or should she have risked everything sooner? Tell me in the comments, because I read every single one, and I am genuinely curious how many of you would have made the same choice she did. And if you want to know exactly who really stole those $11 million and why the trail leads somewhere none of you will see coming, that's a story I'm already working on for next week, because trust me, Dean Foster was never the smartest person in that room. He was just the most convenient one to blame. If this kind of story is your thing, dark, twisted, a little dangerous, and always ending exactly where justice should, go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss where this one goes next. I've got a lot more where this came from.